I came home from my wife's funeral, still wearing the black suit that smelled of the church. My daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, I traded your Dodge Ram. You don't need it anymore." Then she placed a senior bus pass in my hand, right there, in front of the neighbors. The weight of that card burned deeper than the coffin I had just buried. She thought I was too broken, too old to notice. But what she didn't know was that my wife left something inside that truck's glove box, a secret she could never erase. And when I discovered it was missing, I realized the real fight for my dignity had only just begun. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far my story reaches. The cold air clung to my coat as I stepped back into the house that no longer felt like a home. After Claudine's funeral, silence pressed against the walls. The ticking clock in the kitchen seemed louder than ever, marking time that no longer had her warmth in it. The flowers left by friends were already wilting, their fragrance faint, reminding me of how fleeting even kindness can be. Marla was there, moving quickly through the rooms, her heels clicking on the hardwood as though she were closing a deal. No hesitation, no pause to take in the emptiness. She had her phone in one hand, her planner in the other. "Don't worry, Dad," she said without looking up. "I've already handled a lot of the details." Handled. The word stung. For me, there were no details, only memories. The house, the smell of her perfume still lingering in the bedroom, the photograph she insisted on keeping framed even when the colors faded. But Marla didn't see it that way. Her stride was businesslike, her voice brisk, as though grief was something that could be checked off a list. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. Instead, I lowered myself into Claudine's armchair. My hand brushed the worn fabric where she used to sit in the evenings with a book. The emptiness settled in heavier than the winter outside. It was then Marla turned to me, her voice too casual for the weight of what she was about to say. "Oh, Dad, I meant to tell you. I traded the Dodge Ram. It was just sitting there. Got something more practical." The words hit like a blow I hadn't braced for. My chest constricted. That truck was no idle vehicle. I had worked for years to pay it off, polishing its chrome with pride, hauling lumber, driving Claudine into the mountains on quiet Sundays. We'd taken family trips in that cab, her hand resting lightly on mine over the gear shift. The truck carried more than tools. It carried memories. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Marla was already flipping through her planner again, as though she'd mentioned nothing more serious than buying groceries. A sharp chill ran through me, not from the winter air, but from the ease with which she had erased a piece of my life. I sank deeper into the chair. Betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came softly, wrapped in convenience, dressed in practicality. My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears fall in front of her. Later that afternoon, she returned, a small envelope in her hand. "Here," she said with a smile, as though presenting a gift. She pressed it into my palm. Inside lay a senior bus pass. "You won't need a truck anymore, Dad. This will get you around town." Her words carried a finality sharper than any argument. My hand trembled as I stared at the laminated card. The weight of humiliation pressed down on me. At 74, reduced from a man who had driven across states with his wife at his side to someone handed a pass for the bus, a neighbor passing by glanced in, catching sight of me holding the card. Their polite nod only deepened my shame. I curled my hand around the pass, hiding it, though it felt like everyone in town could see the dignity draining from me. That night, the house was colder still. I found myself in the garage, staring at the empty space where the Dodge Ram had once stood. The concrete seemed barren without it, as though part of me had been carved out and hauled away. Memories flooded back, Claudine laughing as she hosed down the truck after a long trip, her hair damp with mist, our quiet talks during drives through Blue Ridge Parkway, where silence was as comfortable as speech. Those memories belonged to that truck, and now it was gone. I whispered into the emptiness. She didn't even ask me. The words hung heavy in the air, but the silence offered no comfort. Instead, my eyes fixed on the bare wall, and a thought gnawed at me, growing sharper with every passing minute. The glove box. Something about it tugged at me, as if I'd left behind more than memories. Sleep never came. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that glove box, slightly ajar in my memory, holding on to something Marla never cared to ask about. I couldn't shake the thought, what had been left inside that glove box. The next morning, the house felt even emptier than the night before. Winter light crept through the blinds, pale and sharp, throwing long shadows across the kitchen table. Restless, I decided to do something that usually grounded me, organizing my papers. Claudine always said keeping things in order made the world feel less heavy. I opened the old metal file cabinet in the den, the one with drawers that groaned when you pulled them out. My fingers went to the folder where the Dodge Ram's papers had always been: registration, insurance, maintenance receipts. But the folder was there without its contents. Empty. My heart thudded as I shuffled through the drawer again. Was nothing. A cold thought settled in. Marla hadn't just traded the truck, she'd made sure I had no say at all. Those papers weren't lost. They were removed. I sat back, the metal cabinet still open like a wound, and pressed my hands against my knees. A strange mix of confusion and dread curled in my chest. For the first time, I wondered if she had been planning this before Claudine's funeral, waiting for the right moment to tighten her grip. Later that morning, I found Marla in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. "Marla," I said carefully, "the truck's papers, they're gone. Do you know where they are?" She barely looked up. "Dad, you don't need to worry about that anymore. I've taken care of it." Her voice was flat, casual, the way someone talks to a child. "That's not the point," I said, heat rising in my chest. "They were mine. I should know where they went." She sighed, setting the phone down with exaggerated patience. "You don't drive anymore. What difference does it make? I handled it for you." The words stung more than the missing documents. It wasn't just about the papers. It was about her tone, the assumption that I was incapable, irrelevant. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to argue further. She was my daughter, yet she looked at me as though I were some burden needing management. That Sunday, she insisted I go with her to the church gathering. It was supposed to be comforting, but I felt uneasy the moment we walked into the fellowship hall. The smell of coffee and donuts usually brought warmth, but today the air felt different. Marla, ever the organizer, took it upon herself to introduce me around. "This is my dad," she said with a sweet smile that hid something sharper. "He doesn't drive anymore. He's slowing down. But don't worry, I'll keep things in order." Laughter, polite and awkward, rippled through the small group. Some nodded, others whispered. My face burned hot, though the room was chilly. Hollis Crane, my neighbor, caught my eye. He didn't laugh. His expression was tight, almost protective, though he stayed silent. Still, the damage was done. Marla had taken the dignity I once carried in this community and reduced me to a spectacle. It wasn't just about a truck or papers. It was about erasing me, one remark at a time. That night, I sat in the den with the light off. The silence was thick. My eyes kept drifting to the empty space on the shelf where the truck's folder had been. A small gap, but it felt like a chasm. Claudine's voice seemed to echo faintly in my mind. "Never let them erase you, Lyman," I whispered into the quiet. What else has she already taken? The question hung in the air, heavier than anything else in the room. Dinner that night felt different the moment I walked into the dining room. The long oak table that Claudine and I had polished and guarded all those years no longer seemed like mine. My chair, the one at the head where I had carved every Thanksgiving turkey, said every prayer, and raised every toast, had been pushed aside. Instead, a smaller seat was tucked near the kitchen doorway, as if I belonged closer to the clatter of pots and the scent of reheated leftovers rather than at the center of family life. Marla smiled as though nothing was out of place. "You're closer to the kitchen, Dad. Easy for you." Her tone was light, but the words carried weight. They pressed on me harder than the ache in my knees. The children chattered over their plates. Sterling talked about work, and the meal went on. Yet for me, every bite of food was bitter. The scrape of my fork against the plate was a reminder that I had been moved aside, shifted from presence to background. Once, Claudine would never have allowed this. I could still see her placing my chair firmly at the head of the table, her hand brushing mine as she set the carving knife down in front of me. "This is your place," she used to say softly, almost like a vow. I had led Grace with her hand resting on my arm, and the family bowed their heads. Now, no one bowed. No one waited. The blessing was forgotten as easily as my seat. The sound of their laughter felt sharp, cutting. I tried to swallow down the taste of it, but it stayed lodged in my chest. The food turned to ash in my mouth. I kept my eyes low, wondering if Marla had thought it through, or if she even cared. Maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe she wanted me out of sight, like an old photograph shoved in a drawer. After dinner, when the clinking dishes were cleared and the voices faded, I walked slowly back to my room. The house sounded different without Claudine. Too hollow, too sharp at the edges. I paused in the hallway and let my hand trail across the wallpaper she had chosen years ago. The warmth was gone from it, replaced by the cold realization that Marla was quietly redrawing what family meant, and I was no longer the anchor. That night, while the others slept, I wandered through the den. Boxes were stacked along the wall, Marla's idea of cleaning out the old junk. I bent to check what was being discarded. At the bottom of one box, half buried under faded newspapers and chipped mugs, something gleamed faintly. My chest tightened as I reached in and pulled it free. The pocket watch. Claudine had given it to me on our 25th anniversary, pressing it into my hand with tears in her eyes. "This watch will always remind you of time well spent," she had whispered. I had carried it faithfully for decades, winding it carefully, listening to its steady tick like a promise. Now it lay tossed aside as if it were worthless. My fingers trembled as I held it, the metal cool against my skin, the memory of her warmth aching in its absence. I sank into a chair and stared at the watch. Every scratch on its surface was a mark of our years together, years Marla seemed intent on erasing. The insult went beyond the watch itself. It was a message. My time, my history, even my love for Claudine, were all disposable in her eyes. A slow burn began in my chest, anger smoldering beneath the sorrow. I placed the watch gently in my drawer, safe where no careless hand could toss it again. The weight of it there felt like armor, a small reminder that not everything could be stolen from me. I whispered to the empty room, the words steady, though my throat was tight. "You can take my seat, you can trade my truck, but you won't erase me, Marla." As I leaned back in the dark, voices drifted down the hall. Marla's voice, sharp in the quiet. "He won't even notice what else we're changing." My blood ran cold. I froze in the dark, realizing she wasn't finished with me yet. Eldon showed up just after breakfast, carrying 2 cups of coffee like it was just another casual visit. He'd been my friend for over 40 years, through ball games, hospital scares, and countless late-night talks on my porch. Yet the look on his face that morning wasn't the look of a man coming to share idle conversation. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, pushed a cup toward me, and leaned back as though rehearsing what he was about to say. We talked about Claudine for a while, the way her laugh filled up a room, the stubborn way she kept her roses alive every year, even when frost tried to take them. Then Eldon's tone changed. He cleared his throat and said, "You know, Lyman, before she passed, Claudine asked me to do something for her. She told me, plain as day, make sure Lyman keeps control of his assets." The words hit like a gust of cold wind through the window cracks. Control of my assets? It was the kind of thing Claudine would say, practical, protective. But hearing it from Eldon now, with his eyes fixed on mine, it felt like a warning more than a reminder. I asked him what exactly he meant, but he only shook his head. "I just think you ought to take a careful look around. Things aren't always what they seem." I tried to press him, but he wouldn't say more. He just sipped his coffee, talked about the weather, and left me with that weight in the pit of my stomach. The house felt heavier after he left, as though Eldon had taken all the air with him. His words rattled around in my head all afternoon. By evening, I couldn't ignore the itch in my chest. Marla had been buzzing around the house with her usual briskness, handling bills, answering phone calls, moving papers from one pile to another. I thought back to the missing truck documents, the way my seat at the table had been pushed aside, the watch tossed into the donation box. Eldon's visit stitched all those moments together into a darker pattern. When I saw him again later that week, he didn't waste time. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I'll put it this way. Marla's been asking me questions about property transfers, about deeds, about powers of attorney. She hasn't said anything outright, but the questions, they're pointed." I stared at him, trying to gauge if he was exaggerating, but Eldon wasn't the type for rumors. His eyes carried the same sober truth that had guided me through 1,000 legal papers over the years. "You're saying she's trying to get her hands on everything?" My voice came out low, steady, though inside I felt a chill. "I'm saying you should review your accounts. Soon." That was all he offered. He put his hand on my shoulder before leaving, the way men do when words can't cover the whole truth. The next morning, I drove to the bank. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I pulled into the parking lot, the thought hammering in my mind. What would I find? Inside, the bank smelled of polished wood and paper. Dorian Sutter, the clerk I'd known for years, smiled faintly when I approached, though his expression faltered when I asked to review my accounts. He typed quickly, eyes darting across the screen, then froze. I caught the hesitation instantly. "What is it?" He swallowed, glanced around as though someone might overhear, then leaned in slightly. "Mr. Briscoe, your daughter came in recently. She asked about closing one of your accounts. She said she had power of attorney." The words landed like a hammer to the chest. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. "Power of attorney?" My voice cracked with anger and disbelief. "Yes," Dorian said carefully, "but we couldn't find any official paperwork on file, so nothing was changed. But—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. I turned away before the heat in my face betrayed me. Marla had gone further than I'd imagined, trying to take authority over my very life as if I were already gone. Walking out of that bank felt like dragging chains behind me. My boots echoed on the marble floor, each step heavier than the last. I climbed into my car and just sat there, staring through the windshield, hearing Claudine's voice in my memory. "Never let them erase you." Lyman, that night, back home, I stood before Claudine's photo on the mantel. Her eyes seemed to meet mine with so steady as always, full of quiet encouragement. "They think I'm too tired to notice," I whispered. "They're wrong." The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. I almost convinced myself I could let it go, deal with it in the morning. But then, passing by Marla's room, I heard her voice through the half-closed door. She was on the phone, laughing. "Don't worry," she said. "Soon. It'll all be in my name anyway." Her laughter sliced through me like glass, sharp and merciless. Standing in the dark hallway, I clenched my fists, every part of me alive with the truth Eldon had tried to soften. This wasn't about helping me. It wasn't about the truck, the papers, or even the seat at the table. It was about taking everything, and I knew, with cold certainty, that the fight had only just begun. The next day I drove out to the dealership, hands clamped on the steering wheel tighter than I should have allowed. My knuckles showed white, but there was no relaxing them. The Dodge Ram had always been more than just a vehicle. It was part of my rhythm, part of Claudine's and my life together. Marla treated it like another thing to shuffle off the shelf. I treated it like memory on wheels. The dealership lot was quieter than I expected. Rows of shiny new cars waiting for strangers to claim them. When I walked in, Dorian Sutter, the clerk I'd seen before at the bank, looked up with surprise. He shifted in his chair, already uneasy. "I need to see my truck," I told him. My voice didn't rise, but there was steel in it. "The Dodge Ram my daughter traded in. I left personal items inside." He scratched his temple, glancing toward the glass wall that looked out at the lot. "Mr. Briscoe, that's not usually how it works once a trade's processed. I don't care how it usually works." I leaned in close. "That was my truck, and I'm not leaving until I look inside." For a long moment he measured me, maybe trying to decide if a 74-year-old man could be so stubborn as to cause a scene. Finally, he pushed back his chair with a sigh. "All right, but just for a minute." We stepped out together into the late winter air, the wind sharp on my face. The Ram sat near the back fence, not yet prepped for resale, its green paint dulled by years of use but still proud. My chest tightened at the sight. I opened the door slowly, as if touching a wounded friend. Sliding into the driver's seat, I reached for the glove box. Claudine's voice came back to me, almost clear enough to hear her whisper, "If anything ever goes wrong, you'll know where to look." The latch gave way. The glove box dropped open, empty. Not a scrap of paper, not a folded napkin, not the worn leather folder I'd expected. My breath caught in my throat. For a second I thought maybe my eyes had failed me, that at my age the mind plays tricks. But it was bare, swept clean. Behind me, Dorian shifted uneasily. "Sir, I should probably tell you. Your daughter came by earlier. She asked to go through the glove box herself. She said she was making sure nothing important got left behind. Took some papers with her." The words cut deeper than any blade. I sat back, staring at that hollow compartment, the echo of Claudine's promise rattling in my chest, the copy of her will. She had put it there. I remembered now with startling clarity. She'd said it once, softly, while folding laundry at the kitchen table. "Lyman, if you ever can't find the paperwork, check the glove box. You'll know why when the time comes." And now it was gone. I shut the glove box slowly, my hand trembling. That piece of paper wasn't just legal formality. It was her last safeguard, her final say in how the life we built would be honored. If Marla had taken it, she wasn't just rummaging through old things. She was reaching for control of our very legacy. Back at home, the air felt heavier than it had in months. I shut myself in the bedroom, locking the door, needing a barrier between me and the rest of the house. Claudine's letters were still tucked in the bottom drawer of my dresser, each one carefully tied with ribbon. I pulled them out and held them close, the paper faintly carrying her scent of lavender. "They think I'm too old, too weak," I whispered to the photo of her on the nightstand. "But you left me enough to fight back. I'll find a way." As I sat there, the phone rang, breaking the silence. The name on the caller ID sent a chill through me. Inez Callahan. Claudine's old friend, someone who had stood beside her long before Marla thought about controlling a single dollar. Her voice was urgent the moment I picked up. "Lyman, we need to talk. There's something you don't know." The room seemed to shrink around me. First the truck, then the will, and now another secret rising from the shadows of Claudine's past. The missing will was only the beginning. What Inez was about to tell me could change everything. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and buttered toast, the kind of scent that normally might have offered comfort. That morning, it only reminded me how hollow I felt inside. Inez Callahan sat by the window, her gloved hands folded over a weathered envelope. Her eyes, soft but urgent, followed me as I slid into the booth across from her. "Claudine told me," she whispered, pushing the envelope across the table, "that one day you might need this." The weight of it in my palm was heavier than any stack of paper should have been. My throat tightened. Claudine had prepared for this. She had seen what I hadn't dared to, Marla's hunger for control. I slipped the papers from their brittle casing, bank records, handwritten notes, and then her letter, ink faded, words still sharp. "Lyman, if Marla tries to handle things her way, remember, the accounts are yours. I never intended for her to decide for you. Keep this safe." The cafe noise seemed to blur as those lines sank into me. Relief and fury tangled in my chest. Claudine had trusted me. She had also known our daughter's shadowed ambition better than I did. My hands trembled, not from age this time, but from the surge of anger running beneath my skin. Inez reached across, her touch steady. "Don't let her take what you've built, Lyman." Claudine asked me to keep this because she didn't trust Marla. I could hardly speak, just nodded, folding the letter back into its envelope as though it were a living thing that might crumble if handled too roughly. That afternoon, Eldon Krause and I walked into the bank together, the polished tile floors, the faint hum of printers, the glass offices. It all felt foreign now, hostile. Dorian Sutter, the clerk who had known me for years, shifted nervously when Eldon introduced himself as my counsel. "We'd like to see the file changes on Mr. Briscoe's accounts," Eldon said. His voice was calm but edged with steel. Dorian hesitated, his glance flicking between us. Finally, he retrieved a folder. Inside, fresh documents bore my name, but not my hand. Signatures bent wrong, slanted like a counterfeit reflection. Marla had filed them, trying to position herself as co-owner, as though I had agreed. Eldon leaned close. "This is fraud, Lyman. If she gets any further, she'll have control over everything. Checking, savings, the house if she pushes hard enough." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the truck or the missing will anymore. She was dismantling my life piece by piece, like pulling nails from a frame until the house collapsed. I closed the folder and looked at Dorian. "You let this through?" His eyes dropped. "She said she had power of attorney. He faltered, ashamed. Eldon's hand rested on my shoulder. "We'll fix this, but we have to be deliberate. No sudden confrontations. Gather the proof." Silence settled over me on the drive home. Fury wanted to claw its way out, to storm into Marla's face with Claudine's letter held high. But something steadier rose in me too, an old farmer's patience, the kind that waits out droughts, the kind that doesn't waste seed before the storm passes. That night, I tucked the envelope into the inner pocket of my coat. Claudine's words felt warm against my chest, a shield stronger than my years. In the quiet of my bedroom, I whispered to her picture. "You were right. They think I'm too tired to notice. They think age makes me blind. But you left me enough to fight back." The porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway. Marla stood there, a folder tucked under her arm, her lips curled into a smile that chilled me. She didn't wait for me to speak, just opened the door as though it were hers already. "Dad," she said sweetly, stepping inside. "We need to go over a few things." She set the folder down on my table with a tap, her smile fixed and certain. Inside my coat, the envelope pressed firm against my ribs. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what I carried. Marla didn't knock. She pushed open the door like the house was already hers and walked straight to the dining table. A sleek black folder rested in her hands, and when she set it down, she did so with the air of someone laying out a winning card in a high-stakes game. "Dad," she said, her voice smooth, controlled, rehearsed. "I brought something important for you to see." Her confidence was unsettling. She slid the papers across the table toward me, her smile quick and sharp. My eyes lingered on the folder before touching the corner of the first page. The weight in the room shifted, thick with the sense that this wasn't just paperwork. This was a weapon. Inside were documents, neatly typed, every word cold and deliberate. At the top, in bold, it read, "Personal Statement of Claudine Briscoe." The breath caught in my chest as I read. It claimed that Claudine wanted Marla to manage every asset, every account, because I was too old and forgetful to keep things in order. The sting was sharper than any knife. Marla leaned forward. "You see, Dad, Mom knew you couldn't keep up. She trusted me to handle everything for you." Her words hit like blows, each one designed to bruise. I studied the bottom of the page where Claudine's signature was scrawled in thin, uneven strokes. My heart thudded as recognition struck. It wasn't her. The loops were wrong, the letters stiff. Claudine's hand had been steady until the end, her script graceful and sure. This was a forgery, and not even a convincing one. I looked up at Marla, and she held my gaze with a smile that dared me to challenge her. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out steady, though rage simmered underneath. "Mom gave it to me." "Of course," she said smoothly. "She told me not to burden you with it while she was alive, but now, it's time to respect her wishes." She tapped the paper like it was scripture, as if my wife's memory had been rewritten and sealed inside this lie. I wanted to shout, to slam the papers back in her face, but I didn't. And instead, I let the silence stretch, The silence unsettled her more than anger would have. Marla pressed on, her voice slipping from confidence into steel. I've already talked with people, neighbors, friends. Hollis understands. Inez does too. They all know you've been slipping. If you fight me on this, they'll only see you as a bitter old man clinging to what's gone. Her words hollowed out the room. The walls themselves seemed to close in, pushing me into a smaller corner of my own life. She wasn't just taking my truck, my papers, my place at the table. She was taking the story of who I was, twisting it into something fragile and pitiful. For a moment, despair threatened to choke me. Then, like a steady flame, Claudine's voice rose in my mind. Never let them erase you, Lyman. I folded the paper carefully, slid it back into the folder, and pushed it toward her. I hear you, I said simply. Her eyebrows lifted, reading surrender where there was none. She thought silence meant defeat. She didn't see the envelope Inez had pressed into my hands just yesterday, tucked safely inside my coat. She didn't know the real proof waited, ready to break her lies apart. Marla gathered her things with a satisfied smile and stood. Good. I knew you'd understand. I'll leave these here for you to think about. But really, Dad, there's no point in fighting. She swept out the door, the folder left behind on my table like a planted flag. As the latch clicked shut, I pulled open a drawer, reached for Claudine's original handwritten letter, and laid it beside the forged statement. The difference was undeniable. The smooth curves of Claudine's handwriting, alive with her strength, against the jagged, trembling lines of the forgery. The truth stared back at me. The lines of her handwriting told me one thing. My daughter's lie was about to crumble. The law office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a scent that carried the weight of truth and history. Eldon had called me early that morning, his voice low, steady, telling me it was time. By the time I walked into his office, my coat felt heavier than usual, carrying both Claudine's original letter and the forged confession Marla had left behind. Inez was already seated by the window, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Hollis Crane sat stiffly beside her, glancing between the door and the table, like a man caught in the middle of a storm he hadn't asked to be part of. Eldon stood behind his desk, his silver hair catching the morning light. His presence alone carried authority, a quiet promise that order would be kept. The air shifted when Marla entered. She swept in with the air of someone who thought the outcome had already been decided. Her blazer was sharp, her hair pinned back tightly, every gesture deliberate. She held the folder like a weapon, lips curled in the faintest smile. "Let's make this simple," she announced, placing the forged confession squarely in front of Eldon. "Mom wanted me to handle things. Dad's been slipping. We all know it." Her eyes flicked toward Hollis and Inez, searching for agreement. Hollis shifted uncomfortably. Inez didn't move. I stayed quiet, my hands resting lightly on my knees. Every muscle in my body wanted to rise, to slam the letter down, to shout, but Claudine's voice whispered in memory, "Patience. Lyman." Marla's voice sharpened as she tapped the paper. "This is what she signed. This is the truth. I'm only doing what's best for him." For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder, marking each second like a drumbeat. Then Eldon cleared his throat, sliding the paper toward him. His glasses caught the light as he read aloud the lines Marla had planted. Claudine supposedly claiming I was too old, too forgetful, that she trusted Marla to manage everything. I could hear my own breath in my ears, tight and hot. Claudine's signature stared up from the page, shaky, unnatural, wrong. When Eldon finished, he didn't look at Marla. Instead, he opened a second folder, slowly, carefully. He pulled out the letter Claudine had written in her own steady hand, the one Inez had kept safe. "Now," Eldon said, his voice calm but carrying weight, "let us compare." He laid both documents side by side, one typed, impersonal, with a trembling imitation at the bottom, the other handwritten, familiar strokes forming words only Claudine could have written. "Lyman is to remain in full control. He has earned that right, and I trust no one else with our legacy." Gasps filled the room. Hollis leaned forward, his face paling. Even Inez, who had known what she carried, covered her mouth. Marla's composure faltered. Her eyes darted from one paper to the other, then up at Eldon. That letter could be fake. You don't know. Eldon cut her off with a steady gaze. Inez kept this sealed for months, just as Claudine instructed. The handwriting, the ink, the age of the paper, they all stand on their own. And you, Marla, will have to explain how this supposed confession appeared only after Claudine passed. The silence was sharp, thick enough to press against the skin. I finally lifted my head, meeting Marla's eyes. My voice came out low, almost a whisper, but it carried across the room. Your mother trusted me. She gave me her faith, her words, and you tried to erase them. Her jaw tightened, eyes flashing with something between rage and fear. You're delusional, she hissed, but her voice cracked on the last syllable. For a heartbeat, I felt both triumph and sorrow. A triumph that truth had surfaced. Sorrow that it was my own daughter standing on the other side of that divide. Eldon didn't move, didn't break the moment. Instead, he reached for another envelope. One I hadn't seen before. He set it on the polished oak table with deliberate care. There's more, he said, his hand lingering over the seal. And it's decisive. The room froze. Even the clock seemed to pause. My breath caught in my chest, knowing that whatever was inside that envelope could turn the tide completely. Eldon's hand moved with deliberate calm, breaking the wax seal on the envelope he had placed before us all. The sound of the paper tearing was small, almost delicate, but in that heavy room it echoed like thunder. Everyone leaned forward. Marla stiffened in her chair, the polished confidence she had worn all morning tightening into something brittle. He drew out the documents slowly, laying them flat on the oak table. My breath caught when I saw the handwriting on the smaller folded note. Claudine's script, steady, graceful, unmistakable. It had been months since I'd seen her words in fresh ink. And the sight cut straight through me. I felt her with me again in that moment, as if she were sitting across from me, her voice whispering, I told you I'd leave you what you needed. Gasps rippled across the room as Eldon turned the larger document so all could see. This, he said with measured authority, is a notarized copy of Claudine Briscoe's last will and testament. The silence that followed was charged, like the room itself was waiting to see who would break. Marla's hands gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles whitening. No, she muttered, shaking her head. That's not possible. Eldon ignored her protest and began to read aloud. His voice was steady, each word landing like a stone in still water. Claudine's wishes were clear. I was to retain full control of all assets and properties for the rest of my life. Upon my passing, everything would be divided fairly among the heirs. Nothing about immediate transfers, nothing about Marla's sole authority. My heart swelled with both relief and grief. Relief, because Claudine had been true to her word. Grief, because it had taken this moment, this public unveiling, for her voice to be heard again in the room she once filled with laughter. Marla exploded. She snatched the paper off the table, waving it in the air. This is fake. Her voice was shrill, trembling at the edges. He's old. He's confused. And you, she pointed at Eldon, you're manipulating him. Eldon calmly retrieved the will from her grasp. The document is notarized, dated, and registered, he replied. Its authenticity is not in question. I sat still, saying nothing. My silence seemed to anger her even more than words would have. Then, Inez Callahan, dear old Inez, rose slowly from her chair. Her voice was soft but steady. Claudine gave me this statement months before she passed. She held up another document. She told me she feared Marla would try to take control, and asked me to be ready to speak the truth if it ever came to this. Marla's face went pale. Eldon took the statement, glanced through it, and read aloud. It was simple and clear. Claudine's deep trust in me, her fear of Marla's hunger for power, and her wish that our life's work not be overturned by greed. The room shifted. Hollis Crane cleared his throat uncomfortably, then spoke. I once heard Marla talking, he admitted. She bragged she was going to take over everything. After Claudine was gone, I didn't want to believe it then. But his eyes met mine, guilt heavy in them. Gasps again. Murmurs filled the room. Marla looked around wildly, searching for someone to defend her, but no one moved. The air in the office grew thick with the sound of her unraveling. She leaned forward, voice shaking. I was only protecting family interests. Dad doesn't understand what he's doing anymore. I was trying to keep things safe. But the words rang hollow. No one believed her now. Eldon's voice cut through. I will be filing an injunction immediately to prevent any further fraudulent claims. His gaze settled on Marla, firm but controlled. You've crossed a line that cannot be ignored. Marla stood so suddenly, her chair scraped hard against the floor. Her eyes locked on me, burning with rage and something darker. This isn't over, Dad, she hissed. You think you've won, but you don't know what's coming. She stormed out, the door slamming behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her words lingered, curling in the air like smoke from a fire that had only just begun to burn. A warning, a threat. And I knew in my bones she would strike again, harder, and with less restraint. The letter came on a gray morning, slid through the slot with a heavy thud that seemed louder than usual. My name was printed in bold across the envelope, and as soon as I saw the seal of the Buncombe County Court, my chest tightened. My own daughter had taken me to court. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands, and read the words, Petition to challenge the validity of will and guardianship hearing. It felt like being disowned twice, first as a father, now as a man trusted to govern his own life. Marla wasn't just after the truck, or the money, or the house. She was dragging me into public, branding me incompetent, and dressing it all up as concern. The coffee in my mug had long gone cold, but I held on to it anyway, trying to ground myself. Claudine's voice echoed faintly in my memory, gentle, steady, the way she always spoke when storms rolled in. Stand tall, Lyman. They can't take your name unless you let them. Still, the sting of betrayal was sharp. My only daughter had turned me into her enemy. Eldon came by that afternoon, briefcase in hand, the lines on his face drawn deeper than usual. He had the look of a man who'd carried bad news too often, but he wasted no time. We knew this might come, he said, setting the papers down between us. She's petitioning the court to invalidate Claudine's will and to declare you unfit to manage your estate. The words hung heavy, but Eldon's tone was matter of fact. He'd been my lawyer and my friend for decades, through mortgage closings, property disputes, even the adoption paperwork when Marla was little. If anyone knew how to stand firm, it was him. He opened his case and began laying out documents like pieces on a chessboard, the notarized copy of Claudine's will, the letter she had written in her own hand, Inez Callahan's sworn statement, Hollis's corroboration. Each piece was a shield against the arrows Marla was preparing to fire. You're in stronger shape than you realize, Eldon assured me. The evidence is overwhelming, but we have to prepare for the way she'll try to twist things. She'll come at you through your age, through your memory, through your dignity. I leaned back, letting the truth of it settle. She's betting the world will believe I've already faded, I said quietly. Eldon studied me. Then show them you haven't. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and stale coffee. The high ceilings seemed designed to make a man feel small. Marla arrived with her attorney at her side, sharp suit pressed, hair pinned, and eyes glinting with triumph. She didn't so much as glance my way as she marched to her table, folder in hand, shoulders squared like a general leading an army. When the judge entered, all rose, and the weight of the proceedings settled like a cloak over my shoulders. This wasn't a family spat anymore. It was a matter of record. Marla's attorney began with calm confidence, painting a picture of a grieving daughter forced to step in as her father's mental faculties declined. Then Marla took the stand, voice polished, dripping with false concern. My father, she said, has become forgetful, disorganized. He misplaces documents, forgets conversations, and is easily manipulated by others who want access to my mother's estate. It's why she trusted me with these responsibilities. The words cut deep. They weren't just lies. They were rehearsed to sound like love twisted into duty. Dorian Sutter followed. His testimony lined up neatly with Marla's accusations. He claimed I had come to the bank confused, forgetting withdrawals, signing papers without understanding them. His voice had that oily certainty that comes from practice. I sat quietly, waiting. When Eldon gave me the nod, I rose. The courtroom eyes shifted to me, weighing my every word, my every movement. Forgetful? I said. Maybe I forget where I left my reading glasses, but I don't forget the wife I buried. I don't forget the truck she loved, and I don't forget my own name. I spoke slowly, deliberately, not with the anger boiling in my chest, but with the steady cadence of a man who still knew himself. I explained each of Dorian's so-called examples, how I had questioned a suspicious withdrawal, how I had refused to sign paperwork without proper review. With each point, Eldon guided me carefully, keeping the truth sharp and uncluttered. The judge watched closely, expression unreadable, but I saw the clerk's pen pause when I answered firmly. I wasn't a man drifting in confusion. I was a man under siege. Eldon stood, tall and unflinching, and began his cross-examination of Dorian, piece by piece. He pulled threads from the banker's story, times that didn't match, procedures that weren't followed, and the uncomfortable fact that Dorian had stood to benefit from Marla's proposed transfers. The courtroom grew tense. Dorian's composure slipped, sweat beading his temple. When Eldon produced Claudine's notarized will and Inez's statement, the tide shifted. The judge ordered the documents entered into record, nodding gravely. Marla's confidence faltered. She clutched her folder tighter, her jaw set, her knuckles pale. I watched my daughter's mask slip, rage flickering beneath the veneer of control. For a moment, she looked straight at me, eyes burning with something beyond anger, something closer to hatred. The judge's gavel struck lightly. We will recess. Preliminary ruling will be delivered after review. The sound echoed like final punctuation, though the story was far from finished. As the courtroom emptied, I sat still, letting the silence sink in. It wasn't about papers or property anymore. It was about dignity, the last thing a man can hold when family tries to strip everything else away. Marla brushed past me on her way out. Perfume sharp, whisper venomous. You won't win, Dad. But I wasn't the one on trial anymore. The morning air was crisp, heavy with a silence that felt almost deliberate. Sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, I tried to calm the knots in my chest. Sleep had come in fits, disturbed by the echo of Marla's words in the courtroom and the gavel's hollow strike for recess. I was still lost in thought when I noticed a figure moving up the path. Hollis Crane. He looked uneasy. His shoulders hunched as though weighed down by something heavier than the envelope he clutched. Lyman, he said quietly, we need to talk. I motioned him up onto the porch. He didn't sit, just hovered by the railing, staring at the envelope in his hands. His voice cracked slightly. I should have spoken sooner, but I didn't know how, or maybe I was just afraid. The envelope trembled as he held it out. This belongs to you. A pit opened in my stomach. With careful hands, I took it from him, noticing the seal unbroken. My gut told me it wasn't a gift, it was a confession. Inside, I found a document stamped by the county office, dated several months back. A property transfer, my land. It named Marla as co-owner. Her signature scrawled alongside what was supposed to be mine. My knees weakened as if the planks under me had softened. That's impossible, I whispered. The signature was jagged, unfamiliar, though shaped like mine. Hollis's face was pale, shame written across it. She cornered me one evening. Said it was just paperwork, some insurance matter, and all she needed was a neighbor's witness signature. She made it sound harmless. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. I realized now what I signed helped her file this fraud. I couldn't carry it anymore. A storm surged inside me. Betrayal burned sharper, but there was a strange flicker of gratitude, too. At least someone still had the courage to bring truth into daylight. "Thank you," I said, voice low, ragged. "It takes guts to admit a mistake." Hollis shook his head. "It takes too long to admit one, and that's the part I'll never forgive myself for." Together, we drove straight to Eldon Krause's office downtown. The air in his study smelled of old paper and black coffee, a place where the truth seemed to weigh more than lies. Eldon took the envelope, scanned the document, and set it down with deliberate care. "This," he said firmly, "is the nail in the coffin. It's a fraudulent deed transfer. If we present this in court, Marla won't just lose her petition, she'll face consequences." He adjusted his glasses and looked straight at Hollis. "Are you prepared to testify that she pressured you into signing?" Hollis nodded without hesitation this time. "I'll swear it under oath. She used me. I won't let her use me again." Relief stirred through me, but it carried an edge of sorrow. I had raised a daughter who thought deceit was a path to power. Yet it was my neighbor, the man next door, not my own blood, who stepped forward when the moment mattered. Eldon organized the evidence neatly into a folder. "We'll file this tomorrow morning. The judge won't ignore it." His confidence steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. That evening, back at home, I pulled out Claudine's old journal and opened to a page where she had once written in her neat script, "Family can wound deepest, but it's also where healing begins, if we let it." I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and added my own line beneath hers. Sometimes justice has to come first, even if it limps. The house was quiet except for the scratching of the pen. Outside, the wind tapped softly at the windows, like an old friend reminding me I wasn't alone. The phone rang just as I closed the journal. Eldon's voice carried urgency. The judge moved the hearing forward. Tomorrow morning, everything will be decided. My chest tightened. Tomorrow held the weight of years, of love, of betrayal, of dignity yet to be defended. The courthouse felt colder that morning than any winter wind I had faced in Asheville. The gray stone building loomed heavy, and stepping inside, every echo of my shoes on the marble floor seemed to remind me of what was at stake. Marla arrived just after me, shoulders squared, her heels striking the tile with defiance, but there was a flicker in her eyes I hadn't seen before, something brittle beneath her hard stare. Eldon placed a firm hand on my shoulder as we entered the courtroom. "This is it," he whispered. Hollis and Inez sat quietly behind me, steady presences in a sea of murmuring voices. The judge entered, and silence fell like a curtain. Papers shuffled. The hearing began. Eldon rose first, presenting the final piece of evidence, Hollis's testimony and the fraudulent transfer Marla had engineered months earlier. The document sat in plain sight on the judge's bench, the damning signature as clear as day. Hollis's voice trembled slightly as he recounted the pressure Marla had placed on him, but his honesty rang out like a church bell on Sunday morning. Inez followed, her sworn statement reaffirming Claudine's warnings about Marla's hunger for control. The judge examined everything with slow, deliberate care. The silence was so heavy I could hear the creak of the benches when someone shifted behind me. Marla's attorney tried to object, waving papers of his own, but the judge's hand cut him off. "Enough," he said flatly. When the verdict came, it landed like thunder. "The court finds that the transfer document was falsified. It is hereby null and void. Claudine Briscoe's notarized will stands as valid and binding. Mr. Lyman Briscoe retains full control of his estate." The judge's eyes lifted to Marla, her face pale as ash. "Furthermore, this court refers Mrs. Marla Jensen for criminal investigation of attempted fraud and forgery." A gasp swept through the courtroom. My daughter's hands trembled as she clutched the forged confession that now meant nothing. Her allies, the same ones who had whispered doubts about me, looked away, slipping quietly out of the pews. She was left standing alone in her fine suit, stripped of all authority she had claimed. The gavel struck, sealing the ruling. Relief surged through me so strongly I had to grip the table for balance. Eldon leaned in. "It's over," he said softly. But for Marla, it was only the beginning of shame. Outside, reporters circled, cameras clicking like cicadas in the summer heat. Neighbors whispered as Marla exited the courthouse, her face twisted between rage and humiliation. Once, she had laughed at me in public, stripping me of dignity with a bus pass. Now, her downfall unfolded for everyone to see. Hollis stepped close and gave me a nod. Inez clasped my hand, her voice gentle. Claudine would be proud. She knew you'd stand. By the time I returned home, the afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, spilling warmth across the porch. The house no longer felt like a prison, but a place of refuge. I walked to the garage and opened the door to the Dodge Ram, parked again where it belonged. Sliding into the seat, the familiar creak welcomed me back. The glove box clicked open beneath my hand. Inside lay Claudine's note, the one she had left for me, her script graceful and steady. I added to it now, my journal entry from the night before, folded neatly beside her words, a testament not just of survival, but of dignity reclaimed. Justice is never quick, I murmured, but it comes. What family takes through betrayal, truth restores through character. As the light faded over the mountains, forgiveness stirred quietly in my chest. Not for Marla's sake, her choices were hers to answer for, but for my own peace. Carrying hatred would only anchor me to the pain. Claudine had always said strength wasn't measured in what a man owned, but in what he refused to surrender from his soul. I sat there in the cab of the old truck until the sun disappeared, the day's last rays brushing the horizon with gold. For the first time in months, my heart felt steady. The battle had ended not in bitterness, but in a lesson etched deep. Dignity defended is dignity restored.